With a key, unlock the door to your imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sight, a dimension of sound, a dimension of mind. You're moving through a land of both shadows and substance, of things and ideas. You have just crossed over to the FOMO zone. Please like and comment on this video. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them. And if you're interested in learning from somebody that's been doing this for over 20 years, then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon if you want notification of new videos as they're released. So what is the FOMO factor? Well, it is fear of missing out. And it drives a lot of decision making. And a lot of that decision making is pretty errant in the scheme of things. And it was one of the main reasons that you saw people buying toilet tissue and all of those sort of products. It wasn't the fact that they were of any practical use. It was the fact that everybody else was buying them that drove people to make that decision. They would drift past the aisle and think, well, there aren't that many left really, are there? And I absolutely do not need any. Everybody else is buying them. And if I don't buy one, then I won't have any. So I'm going to buy some. And you see this manifest itself in financial markets, in sports of all different types, and it's fascinating to watch all of the time. But the funny thing is, it can lead you into a trap. It's very easy to get involved in something. And you see it in general circumstances in life in general. People cotton on to something, and then people don't want to miss out on that. So they end up getting sucked in with the bandwagon effect. What is the bandwagon effect? Well, everybody else is doing it, so I need to do it. And people just lose all sense of judgment in terms of whether it actually makes sense to do that or not. And when we look specifically at financial and Betfair trading markets where money is involved, that is dramatically amplified, because all of a sudden you're going to fear losing money on that as well. So you fear getting in, you fear getting out. It's just a right mess. And this describes why a lot of people struggle with trading, but it also beautifully describes exactly where the best points are to be within the market, where you can play all of that to your advantage. So without further ado, let's examine exactly how that comes to play out. Why that is the case, and more specifically, what can we do about it? So there are several ways in which you can use the FOMO factor to your full advantage. And the first way that we're going to look at, I have covered in videos before, but around specific events that have occurred within the market. And what I'm talking about here is when a day develops a certain theme. And what we mean by a theme is there is a recurring pattern that occurs during the day that starts the FOMO factor. It fires up that little bit of psychology, and then you can anticipate how that is going to manifest itself going forward. So the clearest example that I can give you, and I've given or shown examples at Goodwood, at Ascot, at Cheltenham. This has happened so many times, it's unreal. But it's basically when a jockey wins a couple of races or a trainer wins a couple of races and people start betting on the next race on that basis. So people put two and two together, make 365.4 to 1 and use their last two races as the basis on what they're going to bet on the next race. And that's driven by this case of, well, that's happened. Well, let's project that forward. And typically, when you get just even a little bit of backing in the market, people see the backing and that prompts them to back, and then that backing prompts other people to back, and the whole thing snowballs from there. So yeah, keep an eye on how a day develops, because that may give you a clue as to how a future race could unfold. But also, say that there's a very, very heavily backed horse in the first race, and that horse loses, and then you start to see backing activity in the second race. You get the same sort of thing that occurs in that particular scenario. So when you see significant amounts of activity in the market, you may find significant amounts of activity in the next market. And again, if the favourite in that race is heavily backed and loses, then you'll probably start to see activity on the next race from there. So themes develop over the course of a day. They can have a number of different origins, but basically when you start to pick up on a theme, then your role as a trader is to begin to anticipate how that's going to manifest itself in the next race. It's happened many times in the past. I have done some videos specifically on when this has occurred. And if you watch those videos, you can see all of that in full effect and the way that they happened. But basically, when you start to pick up on this type of a theme, then that will allow you to anticipate how that manifests itself in the next race. So that's the sort of first way that the FOMO factor can develop itself and how you can exploit it. But there are other ways that are a little bit more subtle. Now, there is another way that the FOMO factor manifests itself within the market, which you can also exploit. And curiously, this is by going sort of against it. So imagine you turn up to market, you can see that it's been in a long trend, and you're sort of thinking, well, should I join that long trend? Well, the interesting thing is, unless if there's a theme behind it, then you may want to adopt a strategy that opposes it. But how do you oppose something that's in a strong trend? Well, the interesting thing is that if you get, say, for example, an overnight gamble or some steady backing on something, then typically there's a price at which people aren't willing to back it any longer, especially if there's no current theme behind it. So if there's a series of gambles going on, then that qualifies as a theme. But if this is just an isolated runner that starts to steam, or maybe it's drifting dramatically, it can work in both directions, then you may want to look at opposing it on the other side. Or perhaps there's not much time left in the market for you to be able to ride that trend for very long. And if that's the case, and if those things are in place, then I suggest you go against it. To understand the opportunity, if we look at these squiggly lines, this describes beautifully what the opportunity is and how it manifests itself within the market. So what you will find is that when people arrive in the market, they anchor their entry to the market at a particular point. They will look at the price and they will say, and that becomes their anchor point. So if the price starts to come in from that particular point, then people sort of in their mind go, oh, the price is coming in, the price is coming in. I should do something about this. Let's think about whether I need to see some confirmation. And as the price comes down, that confirmation gets stronger to the point at which they press the button. Now, at that point, the price starts to head back in the other direction. And I'm sure that you've all seen this because I've experienced it too, how frustrating it is that when you do one thing, the market seems to do the other. And when people complain to me that the market's fixed, or that, it always seems to do the opposite of what they expect, this is what you're seeing. I've been through that experience. Loads of other people will go through it, no doubt, but it's a prevalent trend within the market. So the point at which the person gets involved in the market typically is right at the bottom of that particular trend. And it's at that point that people who are in the market much earlier are deciding to start to get out. So this person will hold on as the price heads back in the other direction. It starts to create a potential loss for them. And at some point, that pain becomes too much. And typically that point is the anchor point that they saw within the market. So they bail their position at that point. Guess what happens at that point? Market comes back in the other direction. So if you're in a market, there's no underlying theme, and it feels like you're a bit too late for a trend to develop or for you to catch a trend, then consider going against it. You'll see me doing this on a range of different videos where I catch the market either at the top or the bottom of a trend. And basically I'm sort of exploiting this characteristic. People are thinking about getting in, and all of the smart money was in much earlier. And basically we reach this point of sort of exhaustion where it suddenly becomes lay value, or people who've had large positions start cashing it out. And what I'm trying to do is I'm looking for that heavy backing activity to stop, for the market to sort of wobble and stabilize at that particular point. And then and it will be near the lower end of its traded range. And that's the point at which I get in the market to try and ride it as it goes back out. And I do that for two key reasons. One is that people at a much higher level, when they see the price has stalled, will start closing out their position because they want to maximize their profits. They fear missing out on those profits. And people who are in duff positions, who basically got in too late, will start escaping the loss. They fear a much bigger loss, so they will dump their position there. And very often you'll get a lovely reversal at this particular point within the market. So yeah, it's slightly different from the first example that we looked at, but it relies upon pretty much the same underlying psychological characteristic. So the fear of missing out is very real. It's part of human nature. It's one of the trends that I see repeating endlessly within the markets. It can come in a couple of different forms and for a couple of different reasons, But I have done videos where I talk about things like that occur specifically. And I've also done videos on the second version of FOMO, which is basically where people pile in too late and the market starts to reverse, where that trend has basically come to an end. So the interesting thing about the fear of missing out is it's based around scarcity and fear of loss. And where you can identify that in the market, you can anticipate that particular scenario and profit from it. So anyhow, I hope that video has been useful for you. And if you apply some of this knowledge to the way that you interpret and look in the market, I'm pretty sure you will pick up on this opportunity too.